it's hard sometimes to know when the war is over. We only have to look back to World War II, where it was some decades later, some 10, 20 years later, that there were prisoners of war being released from the Balkan Islands and from various places in Japan, that the American soldiers didn't know the war was over, and many of the prison camps were unwilling to acknowledge that the war was over, and so there were POWs held long after the war was over. There were people who were missing in action who turned up later to be alive. They've just been hiding out because they didn't know the war was over. What happens when that war is a battlefield of ideas? Welcome to Leading Leaders Podcast, 5-minute videos, 5 days a week. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. I think it's true of every kind of warfare. It's really hard to tell as the skirmish is occurring who's on the winning side. I am an avid billiards player, pool, 8-ball, 9-ball, whatever you want to call it. And many times I will be with someone who's a novice in the game and they'll say, well, who's winning? Well, if you've walked up while one player's shooting and they have only 1 or 2 balls left, you might assume they're winning. But it's real easy for an avid player or a pro to look at that and go, well, they only have 2 shots left, but they're not going to be successful in those shots because they border on the impossible. It may look like they're really close to the finish line. It may look like they've already got this in the bag, but what they have ahead of them is undoable, which means the opponent is about to have a chance. And if you know any kind of combat, any kind of warfare, giving the enemy even a chance, giving your opponent even a chance, even a wedge, even a sliver of hope and possibility, means for the moment they have the advantage. I've been watching a lot of different videos of people going into the protest crowds, whether it's the peaceful protests or the more violent protests or the looting and rioting. There are journalists from all sides walking into these crowds. And I've seen CNN reporters and MSNBC reporters and reporters from the alt-right and reporters from the extreme left walking into these crowds with their microphones and their signs and identifying themselves only to be beaten, to have their equipment taken or smashed, to be, whether it's assaulted by police and arrested or assaulted by protesters. And it's happening to all journalists on all sides, by all sides. It's amazing, but here's what it really tells you. It tells you that the battlefield of ideas is still raw and fresh, and no one is convinced they're winning yet. One particular gentleman that I watched, you know what, he had a bunch of facts, a bunch of data, a bunch of what he considered to be very relevant facts, and he would engage someone from the crowd and ask them a question, and as they would answer the question, it was obvious they didn't have any facts. They had a lot of emotion, but they didn't have any facts, and so they would spout back their emotional responses, and ironically, all over the size of this crowd, there were almost the same rhetoric coming back at him, meaning it's a repeated rhetoric, an emotional rhetoric. It's a response, but it's not a thought-through response. And it's probably not one the individual owns, just one they've been given or one they've been told or one that they've heard over and over again, and so they repeat it. But the statistics and their facts, they didn't even come close to each other. They had nothing to do with each other. His data, his facts, his sources were verifiable as much as you trust them. Theirs were purely emotional. But it didn't matter because, as we saw time and time again in his encounters, he would present them with the facts, they would present him with emotion, he would present them with more data and then some of his opinion, they would present them with more emotion and then some of their opinion. Then after a matter of minutes, they would snatch his sign, try to take his microphone, knock down his cameras, push him away, try to surround him as a crowd and intimidate him. Because in the battlefield of ideas, facts don't matter. Let that sink in for a minute. In the battlefield of ideas, facts don't matter. Because facts are like understanding the strategy that says they may only have 1 or 2 shots left, but they're near impossible shots. Those are facts. But somebody who gets emotional about that and says, well, it's not facts, I could still win, is going to do everything they can to win, even if it means to cheat. You catching up with me so far? See, emotional attacks, personal attacks, attacking someone's character or reputation or attacking who they are, that doesn't combat the facts. It doesn't change the idea. It manipulates the narrative, but it doesn't make your point any more valid. And the battlefield of ideas that we're seeing today, a lot of what we see is people pushing an emotional narrative because the emotion that they can stir up is the emotion that's been stirred up in them. And when you can stir up more emotion, you can cause more of an argument, more attention, more emotion for your cause, even if your facts are wrong. So how do you win on a battlefield of ideas? Well, I believe the primary thing you have to do to win on a battlefield of ideas is, first and foremost, remain calm. You have to remain calm. You have to ensure that your response is not so emotionally driven that the facts don't matter. You've got to keep yourself and your head and your words and your reactions physically and mentally calm. Next, you have to make sure you have the facts on your side. You shouldn't have dove into the battlefield of ideas if you haven't done your homework first. If you've done your homework and you have the facts on your side and you have the data on your side, then you should be willing to have a calm and logical conversation, even knowing going into it that in the battlefield of ideas, emotion will try to trump you. Use that phrase for what it's meant. Emotion will try to overwhelm you. Emotion will try to put you down. Emotion will try to overwhelm your words with their reaction, even if they have nothing to do with each other. And every time, the louder voice will be heard. And if they can sympathetically get a lot of people to agree with them, they're going to win. But if you have facts on your side and you have the ability to remain calm, then you only have to add two other things: patience and persistence. See, there's something about the idea of standing your ground, that emotions will rise and fall. Emotions are like the wave of the sea. They ebb and they flow. They come and they go. And the tide of emotion that's being pushed right now by certain agitators is a very strong tide. And it's a very strong emotion. And it's being pushed very hard by agitators. But it will ebb. Over time, you will see people who will get tired of the fight. Emotionally, they will be exhausted. They will realize we're fighting for this and we're not gaining any ground. And it's not because they're not right in what they're emotional about. It's because the facts are not on their side. You can argue as vehemently as you want to that cancer will not kill you. But if you have cancer and you don't overcome that cancer, cancer will kill you. It will eat you up from the inside. And I don't care how you emotionally feel about that. It doesn't matter. The facts matter. The science will matter. The actual data, it will matter. Your emotions, they won't. Your emotions are, it's nice to acknowledge them, but they don't change facts. So be patient and be persistent. Standing your ground also means continuing to repeat the facts until common knowledge is accepted, until genuine wisdom is realized. If you've ever raised teenagers, you know sometimes that's hard. It's really hard for them to understand that, yes, I know all the data is not in on vaping. Yes, I know all the data is not in on smoking weed or doing whatever other kind of drugs you want to do today. But what I can tell you is that over generations of people, these ideas have come up again and again to legalize this or legalize that, to allow this, to allow that. And time again, people who have remained successful in life have intentionally avoided those things. There is a direct correlation. Those who find themselves standing in lines, waiting for someone else to help them out, they're often those who have given in to these harmless drugs. I'm just saying. The evidence is clear. You can get as emotional as you want to. The facts prove themselves out over time. So remain calm. Know your stuff. Be patient and be persistent if you want to win on a battlefield of ideas. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.